So multiple regression results are really important and interesting, but they're also a little bit more difficult to wrap your brain around. So we're going to spend some more time, looking at those results today. So as in the past, we're interested in those four kinds of validity. Construct validity are measures reliably measured. Are they valid? External validity, can we generalize them to other groups, or which groups are they appropriate to generalize to? Statistical validity, are these statistically reliable results? And internal validity, are there other explanations for what we're finding? Multivariate designs get us a little bit closer to answering the internal validity question. Not as close as probably most of us would like. So here is our correlation, just our bivariate correlation between exposure to sexual TV content and pregnancy risk. What Chandra et al. Did is they collected a whole series of variables, and I'll show you all of them later. And they looked at the relationship between those predictor variables, exposure to sex on TV and age, and also our criterion variable, our outcome or dependent variable, which in this case is pregnancy risk. So when we have a significant beta, so this here is beta, we can say a number of things. We can talk about it in a number of different ways. We can say the relationship between exposure to sex on TV and pregnancy is positive. So high levels of sex on TV are associated with higher levels of pregnancy risk, even when age is controlled for. Or we might say the 95th percent confidence interval, so right here, between exposure to sex on TV and pregnancy does not contain zero, suggesting that this relationship is positive even when controlling for age. Or we might say the relationship between exposure to sex on TV and pregnancy is positive. High levels of sex on TV are associated with higher pregnancy risk and is not attributable to the third variable of age because it holds constant, even when age is held constant. However, there are places where beta are not significant, as in frequency of family meals predicting academic success. Here, not significant. And you see that our confidence interval for beta includes zero. And we can say a number of things in this situation. When controlling for parental involvement, the relationship between family meal frequency and child academic success has a 95% confidence interval that contains zero and is not significant. Or we might say the relationship between family meal frequency and child academic success can likely be explained by the third variable of parental involvement, which is statistically significant and does not include zero. Or we might say the relationship between family meal frequency and child academic success goes away when parental involvement is controlled for. So a number of things we can do here. Here is what they found overall. You note that they collected a whole series of different kinds of predictors, some of which are statistically significant, including living in a two-parent household, exposure to sex on TV, total TV exposure. So we're looking in this column here for things that are below 0.0 or below 0.05. So some of these are statistically significant and some aren't. And you should, sit down with this, try and figure out which ones aren't, and then how would you frame, how would you say what is being described here? How would you describe this relationship? So here's another table. This is predicting political conservatism at age 18. So political conservatism is our criterion or dependent variable. These are our predictor variables or independent variables. Here we have beta, and here we have our p-value. And again, p-values less than 0.05 are statistically significant. Most of these, or many of these, are statistically significant, and some aren't. And so your question, one of the things you can do to prepare for the exam is just look at the table and figure out which ones are statistically significant and which aren't. So one of the things we need to do is learn how to interpret a regression table. And so one of your friends might look at these data and say, the only reason authoritarian parenting is associated with adult conservatism is income. Richer parents are probably more authoritarian, and richer parents are going to have more conservative kids. So stop and think about this. What would you say? So we can look at this table and particularly look at socioeconomic status at 54 months, which is not statistically significant. And based on that, we might say, what you're saying is probably incorrect because SES was included in the analysis. And authoritarian parenting still predicts conservatism. Here's another friend of yours who looks at these data and says, the only reason authoritarian parenting is associated with adult conservatism is that conservative parents are probably more authoritarian, and conservative parents are going to have more conservative children. So I think this is a good question to ask, because if we look at these predictors, you see that there isn't anything about parental conservatism or parental political views. And so this is sort of that third variable question. There may always be another variable that hasn't been assessed when we're doing multiple regression. So we can recognize multiple regression in popular articles in a number of ways. Generally, what authors say is something like controlled for, adjusting for, considering. That is, if they're doing a good job with what they're saying. So in this particular article published on Very Well Mind, Crystal Jagu says, after controlling for SES, the research found that individuals who took out student loans during undergraduate and graduate studies reported a greater likelihood of delaying personal and professional milestones. Those who reported debt from doctoral studies as SES decreased, the likelihood of delaying milestones also increased. So think about the criterion variable and the predictor variable. And just turn off your video for, until you're able to answer this. Okay, so your criterion variable is, delay of personal and professional milestones, something like that. Predictor variables include include socioeconomic status and reported debt. And you notice that Jagu says after controlling for, which is said exactly the way that you'd like it to be said. So regression does not establish causation. Multiple regression can control third variables if they're included. Remember, parental conservatism wasn't included in that one study. It can control for third variables, but can't establish temporal precedence, which came first. For example, sexual contact or sexual content or sexual activity. Researchers can't control for variables they don't measure. There could be important third variables that they failed to measure. And that's something that, as we're reading, as we're performing research, that's something that we should be thinking about. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye and take care.